Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Audit Committee meeting for March 20th, 2024. My name is Paul Russell, and I represent Lower Sackville, and I'd like to call the meeting to order. I'd also like to acknowledge that the Halifax Regional Municipality is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people. The municipality acknowledges the peace and friendship treaties signed in this territory and recognizes that we are all treaty people. I'd also like, because this is the Audit Committee meeting, I'd like to welcome the two members of the public who are serving on the Audit Committee to the meeting, Carolyn Deschênes and Taiwo Lawal, and I'm sorry if I mangled your name. The next item on the order of business is the approval of the minutes of August 16th, 2023. And if I could have a motion, please. Thank you, Councillor Lovelace, and seconded by the Deputy Mayor to approve the minutes of August 16th, 2023. Are there any errors or omissions? Not seeing any. All in favor of the minutes, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Great, that passes. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the order of business and approval of additions and deletions. Over to the clerk. Are there any changes to the agenda this morning?
Yes, Chair, we have an addition of an in-camera item, agenda item 6.2, a personnel matter.
Thank you very much, Dorothy. And go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
To approve the order of business as amended? Is that what you want?
I'm sorry?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, was it to approve the order of business as amended?
I thought you were going to add another in-camera item.
It was listed as in camera? Good, thank you.
Thank you. We have the addition of 6.2 as a personnel matter. There are no further, I don't see any further changes to the agenda. So all in favor of the order of business as amended, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Great. Did I get a mover and a seconder? Yep. I did. Okay, thank you. I apologize. Call for declaration of conflict of interest. Not seeing any. The next item on the agenda is the audit of the consolidated financial statements, March 31st, 2024. And I would ask the external auditors to step forward. Great, thank you very much, Dorothy. And Carrie Blair is the lead audit engagement partner from KPMG, and I understand you have a presentation for us this morning. And so the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I put the presentation up on screen. I will touch on the highlights. It was included in the materials that were circulated. There's been no amendments or changes based on what I'm presenting here today. But I have with me today my senior engagement team. So there's myself, Paul James, who's an engagement partner at KPMG, as well as Loan Hong, who is our engagement senior manager, and they're both with me today. One of the things that I would just comment on from an engagement team point of view is this is my 13th year as the lead audit engagement partner. for the HRM, which has been very enjoyable for me professionally. However, within our own professional rules, we have to consider familiarity risk as a concern with respect to independence. And so Paul is the engagement partner who will effectively shadow me this year and take over as the lead engagement partner next year. Page 4 of the presentation talks to the highlights. We do have slides that address most of these matters that are highlighted in pink in particular. Materiality is something that's certainly a concept with respect to the audit of financial statements, and in particular the consolidated financial statements that are prepared in accordance with public sector accounting standards. We base our materiality consistent with prior years in presentations. This year it is sort of roughly calculated at $16 million. That's a quantitative measure for the financial statements as a whole. As we go through and scope our audit, we have used smaller amounts to take into account the fact that there may be aggregation risk given the breadth and depths of services that the HRM provides in the various departments, so that we don't excuse everything away as being immaterial, where there might be a risk that there are errors that will aggregate up to a potential material misstatement. We do involve others in our audit. Most notably, we do involve a non-KPMG member firm who audits the Halifax Regional Water Commission, which is a significant item within the financial statements, consolidated financial statements. So we do direct that work through direction and instruction, and take responsibility in the context of the consolidated financial statements of the HRM for the results and the sufficiency of the information provided related to the Water Commission. You'll also note that based on the work that we do perform, we do scope in and do procedures over virtually all the assets that are on the balance sheet, as well as the majority of the expenditures, and with that would be also the revenues on the other side. What would be not included in that, and why you'd see 94% there'd be certain expenditures at various, I'll say numerous would probably be a better way to describe them, boards and commissions that are consolidated in that individually just aren't material to the financial statements, and there would be no possibility of a material misstatement as a result of that, as well as when they aggregate up, we don't believe there would be a possibility that those particular entities would have errors that would cause material misstatements as a whole. As I mentioned, materiality, the benchmark that we use is total expenditures or expenses, which is roughly, we look at the budgets and how they've been set, and we sort of use that as a forecasting tool to help us understand what the amount could be this year, and it's roughly just under 1.2 billion, I guess would be the right way to describe that, which is up slightly from the prior year of about 1.1 billion. So not much of a change from a materiality point of view. Maybe to you or I, $1 million would be a lot, but to the consolidated statements of the HRM, it is not a significant amount. Less than 1%. I mentioned involvement of others. One of the measures that are included within the financial statements are often estimates around employee future benefits that are obligations of the HRM. So we do look at management specialists that they engage. They're external parties. They're parties that we evaluate whether they have some vested interest from an independence point of view or not, and the competency of them. And traditionally, those parties are appropriate to rely on, and there's no concern that there might be some bias in the results. So we plan to rely on them as well. If we, for some reason, did not believe that they had performed their duties responsibly, we have our own internal specialist that could review those results if need be. We've already talked about the scoping of the audit, as well as the involvement of the other audit firm. In terms of changes this year, there's not much change from a risk point of view. We look at whether there are new risks or significant risks. There's always a significant risk related to management override of controls that we need to take into account. This is really a presumed fraud risk in all audits of financial statements, and we have designed procedures to address those concerns. The other area that is new this year is the adoption of a new revenue standard. It replaces and is meant to consolidate a lot of the requirements around revenue. There are certain exemptions from this standard because they're dealt with in other parts of the accounting framework, most significantly being tax revenue has its own accounting framework to define how you do that, as well as transfers between governments, so grants, things of that nature wouldn't fall within the scope of this. So this would be all other revenue outside of that, service revenue, things of that nature, any contributions of, I think another significant source is sometimes the contribution of assets from developers. Those would all be within the scope of this new standard, and we will need to ensure that the city has and the staff have appropriately considered whether that results in a different accounting answer than previously had been concluded under the old standard. Talked about management override of controls, and have talked about we don't anticipate that the revenue standard will cause anything significant amount of risk, so we've evaluated that risk to be base, and we, as outlined there, and as I mentioned, we'll look to management to ensure that we identify all the relevant potential areas that it could impact and how management has assessed the potential impact. And if there is an impact, then we would recalculate and verify that they've accurately reflected that change. Time frame, I think maybe I'd just like to go to the punchline. We hope to have the financial statements in front of this committee come July, so that the financial statements can be approved by council in a timely manner. That means that the majority of our audit work will be performed between the months of May through July. We have significant time allocated in June in particular to do a bulk of the year-end field work, which will hopefully mean that we're in great shape come the 1st of July to wrap up all the customary things that happen at the end of the audit, including communicating back to this committee any of our findings. And there are a number of appendices included. I don't plan to go through them all, but they're there for information purposes for the most part. Some of them are required, outline the required communications that we as auditors have to do with respect to the governance committees of organizations. The others are more for information. We left in a number of slides on environmental, social, and government, or ESG. I know that's a fairly popular topic these days, and they're based largely off of what's been happening in the international space, not necessarily Canada. I will provide a really brief update on that. Canada has just released their draft proposals based off of the international standards that were published a few years back that would govern what they think Canadian entities should do. However, as I mentioned, those are standards that would apply largely to publicly listed entities because the securities commissions would have mandates that suggest what publicly listed entities need to disclose related to ESG, but many other organizations look to those standards as a best practice to consider what may meet the needs of their organization. And I welcome any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Kerry, for that presentation. At this point, I would like to open the floor to any questions for Kerry. I don't see any questions. Okay. Go ahead, Councillor Daigle-Gammon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I was a little late getting to the button there. Thank you, Kerry, for the presentation. And I know that when you started, you said you were in your 13th year. That's a long time. And so you said Paul James will be shadowing, and then next year he is the lead. What would be the industry standard for a firm to stay with a company doing their audit? an organization like HRM?
Thanks for the question. It's not an easy question to answer because there is no industry standard. There are standards that exist that have been mandated by the Securities Commission. There is no standard that deals with rotation of firms. There are standards that deal with rotation of audit partners. So in a listed entity, there are rotational requirements after 5 and 7 years, depending on the role of the partner. In private, public sector entities, there is no formal rule of thumb. We as a firm have suggested that for an organization like the HRM, that we should have policies in place to mandate our own rotational requirements to deal with that familiarity risk. And we have used sort of a time frame of 10 to 15 years, depending. You know, there would be 10 years would sort of be where we would start to look at that rotation happening. So we've determined last year that we would have to transition a new partner in within the next 2 years. So this would be in the second year of that approach, and that's why Paul is here to
Great.
learn the ropes, if you will.
And we have 2 more years on this contract with the firm?
You have, I believe, 4 more.
4?
I think last year we were appointed for another 5 years.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Deputy Mayor, go ahead, Jerry.
Yeah, thank you. So last year, Deputy Mayor, Council Audit and Finance and Council approved a 5-year solicitation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't see anybody else on the board for questions for Kerry. Can somebody please put the motion on the floor? Do people have the motion? Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that the Audit Committee approve the attached audit planning report for the year-end audit of HRM's consolidated financial statements, general rate surplus statements, and miscellaneous trust fund statements as prepared by the municipal auditor, KPMG.
Thank you very much. Seconded by Councillor Lovelace. Is there any discussion on the motion? Are there any questions? Go ahead, Deputy Mayor. Okay, thank you. Not seeing any questions. All in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Great, thank you very much. Kerry, if you wouldn't mind sticking around. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the in-camera minutes of August 16th, 2023. Thank you, Councillor Hensby, seconded by Councillor Lovelace. All in favor of the minutes of the August 16th, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Great, thank you very much. The next item is 6.2, the in-camera item. So could I please have a motion to go in camera? Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Seconded by Councillor Lovelace. All in favor? Please signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Great, thank you. Kerry, you can stay. Yep. And we are back in public. Hello, everybody. There was no directional motion provided in that in-camera discussion. So the next item on the agenda is the date of the next meeting of the Audit Committee, and at this point, that is to be determined. We will work through that through the rest of the year as we get the audit completed. The next item on the agenda is a motion to adjourn. So could I please have a, thank you, Councillor Lovelace and the Deputy Mayor. We stand adjourned. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Audit and Finance Standing Committee meeting for March 20th, 2024. My name is Paul Russell, and I represent Lower Sackville, and I'd like to call the meeting to order. I'd also like to acknowledge that the Halifax Regional Municipality is located in Mi'kma'ki, which is the ancestral and traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people. The municipality acknowledges the peace and friendship treaty signed in this territory and recognizes that we are all treaty people. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of February 21st, 2024. Moved by Councillor Hensby, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Are there any errors or omissions in those minutes? Not seeing any. All in favor of the minutes, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Great, thank you. That passes. The next item is the approval of the order of business and approval of additions and deletions. Over to the clerk. Are there any changes in the agenda today?
No additions or deletions have been received by the clerk's office.
Okay, thank you very much. And can I have a motion from Deputy Mayor? Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Lovelace for the approval of the order of business. Are there any changes from the committee? Not seeing any. All in favor of the order of business as presented, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Great, thank you. There doesn't seem to be any business arising from the minutes. Call for declaration of conflict of interest. Not seeing any. Motions of reconsideration, motions of rescission, consideration of deferred business, and notices of tabled matters are all none. So we have correspondence and petitions. Over to the clerk.
No correspondence or petitions have been received by the clerk's office.
Okay, thank you very much. And are there any petitions from members of the committee? Not seeing any. Okay, thank you. And there are no presentations. The next item on the agenda is public participation. This is an opportunity for members of the public to step forward and address the Audit and Finance Standing Committee. And we really appreciate the input from members of the public for this. At this point, at this point, nobody has signed up in advance to address the committee. So I will ask for all of those in the gallery if anybody would like to step forward and address the Audit and Finance Standing Committee. Are there any members of the public who would like to step forward and address the Audit and Finance Standing Committee? And third time, are there any members of the public who would like to step forward and address the Audit and Finance Standing Committee? Great. Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is information items brought forward. There are none. And so we are on to the Auditor General's report, and this is a follow-up of the 2022 audit. I would invite the Auditor General to step forward and welcome Andrew Atherton back to City Hall. And go ahead, Andrew, the floor is yours.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Is my presentation up? Do I need to do something? There we go. Perfect. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I have 2 chapters to go over. Yeah. There we go. So I have 2 chapters to go over with you today. I'll start with our follow-up review of our 2022 Respectful Workplaces audit, and then I'll speak to our new report on management of hiring practices. You'll note that both of these focus on the HR business unit, and I think they both provide some indications that there are some improvements necessary there. Before I get into the reports, I should start by thanking the great team that makes these reports happen. With me today is Leanne Burnett, who led our hiring practices audit. I also want to thank everyone back in my office. This work has been completed by them. I get the easy job of talking you through what they found. All right, starting with our follow-up of respectful workplaces. Overall, just 1/3 of the recommendations have been implemented since we reported this audit in June of 2022. Only 5 recommendations have been addressed while 10 remain incomplete. That is far below the expectation of 80% completion after 18 months, and it leaves me frankly pretty concerned with the lack of progress. Looking at the incomplete recs, these fall into 2 groups. 8 of them live with the HR business unit and 2 of them are with the CIO's office. I'm not going to read through all of the incomplete recommendations. They're all in our report. You've seen those. I don't need to go into details. At a high level, they cover areas such as establishing performance measures, monitoring to ensure required training is taken, developing QA programs. Suffice it to say, there's a lot of work to be done, and I encourage you to ask management what their plans are to address those going forward. Now, moving along, despite the overall negative results, HR has implemented 5 recommendations. Again, not going to read through them. Important work such as developing a process to monitor workplace violence has occurred. And obviously, I'd like to see more done, but there have been 5 recommendations addressed. Those are improvements to where things were 18 months ago. So that about covers it for, hold on. I forgot to make my note that I wasn't supposed to click the slide yet. I will note, management have indicated to me that they're close to implementing some new policies that they expect will address a lot of the outstanding recommendations. Our work is up to, I believe it was about March 1st for this. So anything that happens after that, we don't get into that. So when we get finished with the presentation and you ask some questions, I do believe that management has some more information that will help with where they see things going in the not too distant future. I promised the CAO I would reference that. It's not part of our audit because, as I said, we do our work up to a certain date. We can't be auditing in perpetuity, but I believe there are some things that are underway that will help. Now I'm supposed to click to the next slide, so there we go. With that, I will move on to walk you through the highlights of our audit, looking at management of hiring practices. This audit, again, focuses on the HR business unit with some recommendations that will land with the CIO's office, similar to respectful workplaces. The other similarities you'll note there is a lot of the same issues. Concepts such as monitoring QA programs are lacking in both audits. Looking at some of our overall conclusions from this audit, the biggest similarity to our follow-up work is that the audit results are not good. A lot of issues, a lot of concerns. We found gaps in policies, a lack of processes and details to support how to implement the policies that do exist. Now, I know auditors often like to cite a lack of documentation, a lack of policies, it's not clear. But I can tell you in this case that our testing results very much backed up our concerns with the gaps in policies. At a high level, we reviewed 40 competition files and 10 appointment files, and we had concerns at some level with all 50 of those files. We noted a lack of information to support diversity inclusion processes. We had concerns around monitoring of training requirements. We found access to hiring files was not appropriately restricted. Before I get into the details, though, I do want to clarify one, I think it's very important aspect of what we were doing, or more importantly, what we were not doing. We were not assessing the performance of individuals hired in the files we tested. We were looking at the process to hire them. So if we flag a poor competition or an unsupported appointment, that should not be taken to imply that the individual is not doing a good job today. Our findings are around the process for hiring. And that's as far as any of our findings can be taken. Anything beyond that is performance management, performance assessment, and that's not what we're looking at, that's a management role. I just want to make sure that when we talk about poorly supported hirings or files that don't have the documentation, I'm not saying that the folks that were hired as a result of those they could be doing an amazing job right now. We didn't look at that, I can't speak to it. So let's move on into the details. We identified 4 key policies guiding hiring in HRM. Some aspects of these policies were reasonable, but we found gaps within them, and more significantly, little to no guidance for how staff should implement them. A couple of specific concerns: no monitoring or reporting of results under the fair hiring policy. When management is not monitoring performance, the kind of results we found in our testing become almost inevitable. Management and HR needs to make doing things right a priority, and to do that, they need to start keeping an eye on hiring performance across the municipality. The other main area where we had concerns was the lack of direction around how a vacancy should be filled. Generally, there are 3 possible approaches. You can have an open to anyone external competition, you can have an internal candidates only competition, or a directed appointment where someone is given a job without any competition at all. Each of those serves a purpose. They're all appropriate, they can all be legitimately used, and they're all necessary at different times. But generally speaking, the less open the competition, the more opportunity for bias or inappropriate decisions. We expected to find a lot more clarity to define when a less open approach was acceptable, but that simply did not exist. Within competitions, we found a lack of direction around how to complete steps such as candidate screening, what employment checks were required. Okay, moving into our competition testing. So this is your internal and external competitions. All of our concerns with policies and procedures become very tangible when we start to discuss these results. We selected 40 competitions, again, either internal or external, and in every single file we had problems. The lack of clarity around what is required or expected resulted in a myriad of issues. In the end, that great team I was talking about, led by Leanne, were able to cobble together enough evidence for most of the files to support the decisions that were made. But in 4 cases, we were not. In those competitions, the evidence suggested the selected candidate was not the best option. Now, we recognize the hiring manager has the final discretion to select the person they feel is best for the role, but we expected the reasons for those decisions to be clearly documented in the files, and they're not. The resulting risks to the organization of biased hiring decisions is pretty high as a result of that. And the lack of monitoring centrally by the HR business unit just increases that risk. HR were clear that the final decisions are not their responsibility, that they are the responsibility of the hiring manager. I understand that, but we would expect that at a minimum, central HR would be tracking any decisions that aren't consistent with the fair hiring policy. And again, we found no tracking, no monitoring being done. We did note HRM is using designated positions to increase the numbers of underrepresented groups. That's great, but we found there's no data showing the current situation for any of those underrepresented groups in HRM. As a result, we can't determine if those designated positions are having the expected or they're a meaningful impact. Okay, moving on to appointments, similar messaging to what you've just heard. We looked at 10 appointments. For 5 of these, we could not find evidence to justify the decision to use an appointment over a competitive process. We found the emphasis of management was to support why an individual was appointed, but we view that as only part of the story. We're expecting management to explain why a position needed an appointment or warranted an appointment rather than a competition. Presumably, the best candidate will get the job through an open competition. So our concern was that what made each of these positions, what was the situation that said we need to appoint someone into this role? And generally, we found an explanation of why the person should be appointed. Now, I say that, but at the same time, in all 10 of the files, we had issues with the support that was there. In fact, none of the 10 had clear evidence in the file that the person hired met the defined qualifications for the job. Moving out of our testing into more generic findings, given the problems we found in the files we tested, it's not surprising to find there's no quality monitoring process in place within human resources around hiring. There's no process to review their files to ensure the files even exist, let alone that relevant information is included. Similar issue to one noted in the Respectful Workplace audit. This is indicative of what I would suggest is an underlying issue within the Human Resources Business Unit. They need to get focused on doing and documenting things well. We also noted issues around training courses. Management within the HR Business Unit are not monitoring completion of the required training hiring courses by hiring managers. So again, another issue of no monitoring of what needs to be done. On to my last slide of detailed results. We found multiple instances of employees having access to files and systems that they did not require to do their jobs. We also found that nearly half the required confidentiality and conflict of interest forms from interview panel members were not completed. Sorry, I'm going to sound like a broken record. Once again, nothing in place to monitor that any of these requirements were being done. Okay, let's wrap this up so I can let you folks start to ask questions if you have them. So we made 17 recommendations, and management have accepted them all. That's good news. I've had very positive meetings as we wrap this audit up. I am hopeful that things are going to move in the right direction, and I believe that management is understanding this. We'll do our first follow-up on this about the same time we revisit respectful workplaces in about a year and a half. And as I said, I'm pleased with I'll say the vibe I have from management over where we're headed on this, but we need to see action. You need to push for action and make sure that we have some progress to improve this. Now, I said I'd let you get to questions, but I want one more slide to really quickly just touch on what we have coming up. I'll be back in April to talk to you about our annual report along with my audit priorities for 24-25. Also, our next follow-up work will be looking at work on our corporate real estate audit in the near future. And with that, I will actually turn it over to you. We're happy to take any questions you have, and I know management is here, and you may have some questions for them as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for that report. That was interesting. Wondering if members of the committee have questions for the Auditor General. Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Andrew, for this report. I think it's difficult to receive all of this in a way. But I'm curious, when was the last time that there was an audit done with HR? Would you know that by any stretch?
I believe it would have been a respectful workplaces audit that would have been done in June. I think it was June of 2022 would have been the last piece we had done at HR.
Right, okay, I guess I was just thinking like before that.
Any idea?
Yeah,
No,
could be a while, right?
I don't recall any at all.
Don't recall any? Okay, I guess I'm wondering if there was, a benchmark for where we were to how did we get here now? And then when we're looking at this, I mean, it sounds great that all recommendations have been accepted and there's a plan, there's the follow-up in 18 months. Normally we've, with the reports from the AG's office, we've asked for like an action plan that would come back to the committee. So maybe, I think we've usually said within 6 to 8 months or 6 months or so, if there's an action plan that will come back to make sure, it's just a little gauge, I guess, where are we and how are we going to meet these recommendations? Is that something that you would think appropriate?
absolutely. I think that's a wonderful first step for this committee to ask for some details. The management have indicated they accept these, and they've given, there's a small snippet for each recommendation of what they intend to do. I think asking them to provide a little more detail around that with some timelines is a really good approach.
Thank you very much.
Let's go with Councillor Lovelace for now, and we'll go back to you, Deputy Mayor. Go ahead, Councillor Lovelace.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the recommendation for the action plan, Deputy Mayor, because that's kind of where I was going as well. So thank you for that. I appreciate this report. It actually validates quite a few of concerns that I've had, so it's really good to see this. I've consistently talked about the file documentation concerns. And when I look at over half of the hiring managers lacking diversity inclusion training, what? Like that, to me, that's really, really disappointing, because we've worked so hard at this municipality for many years to ensure that throughout the entire organization, people are aware of the importance of diversity inclusion, and also the fact that, you know, hiring managers primarily need to understand that as we're bringing people into the fold and into this organization. So, you know, I think this is great. Again, the lack of oversight. And I think part of that is like we're moving really, really fast. We're growing quickly as an organization. We're bringing people in. We've got people who are leaving. There's a lot of hiring happening. And so with that cycle, you know, that process is just so important. We can't leave the process. We have to stick with it. So thanks for this report. I just think that, you know, it's great to see where we are doing well. But every time I see that comment that, you know, where is it? All accepted by management. Well, of course they do. Of course they accept it. But the key is, when are we going to see it? So I'm going to wait for Deputy Mayor to put that motion on the table, and I will support that for an action plan. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lovelace. Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Councillor Lovelace. Yes, I would like to make a motion that we require an action plan within 6 months to come back to the Audit and Finance Committee.
Thank you. And do we have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Lovelace, thank you. Is there any discussion on that motion? And does the clerk have the text of the motion? You do. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Is it possible, I guess I was wondering about some of the other action plans as well. And I was just wondering if this might be a new item and not on the motion. Sorry, sir, I'll come back after we vote on the motion.
Okay. Thank you. I don't see any further names on the list for discussion of this motion. So all in favor of the motion on the floor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Great, that motion passes. Thank you. Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one more. Andrew, there's a couple of action plans that have been requested, and I'm just wondering if we'd be able to get a status update on those action plans that are requested in some of the previous audits that have been done.
My understanding is those action plans would be coming from management.
Okay.
So we wouldn't have, once we've issued the report, we don't really have any role to play until we do our follow-up in 18 months. Those action plans would be from management, and that would be them telling you how they're planning and where they're planning to go with implementing the recommendations.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Mayor. I don't see any further speakers on the list. Go ahead, Councillor Purdy.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me here today. I just wanted to follow up, and I don't know if this is the appropriate place for this, but just what our auditor had said, that management, or maybe the CAO, had some plans to address some of the issues in the follow-up presentation that you had today. So I was just wondering, are we allowed to ask for update on maybe what those plans are? Okay, I would like to ask to hear from our CAO then and see what she has in store. Thank you.
Thank you, through the chair to the councillor. I'll also cover the action plan question from Councillor Deagle-Gammon too. So the only audit I'm aware of that the action plan has not been completed and come back to audit and finance now was the one on the fire prevention or fire inspection. And I believe the timeline given on that was for it to come back within 6 months. I actually have a meeting with Chief Stubing today, so I will inquire on the status of that. The other most recent one before that would have been the cybersecurity audit, and that action plan has come back to council, along with the identification of the resources required to implement the recommendations. They're part of this year's budget. And I believe there are some resources that were identified in the fire business unit plan to help them address their recommendations regarding the fire inspection audit. With respect to the respectful workplace audit, the majority of the recommendations, well, actually, be addressed, we believe, 10 days from now, because we have an updated respectful workplace policy, an updated code of conduct, and a whistleblower policy, which will take effect on April 1st. And of course, part of the process to get to the point that we had policies to be able to implement, Human Resources did a lot of work this year, but we also had to take the time to work with the unions and the union presidents on the development of these policies and seek their feedback. So those policies will be launched April 1st.
Okay.
May
Thank
I-
you very much, CAO. Go ahead, Councillor Purdy.
Sorry, just a follow-up question on that. So when the new policies are released, how will they be measured and monitored going forward? Because this seems to be a recurring theme, that they're not measured or monitored regularly. So what will be the plans to kind of mitigate that from happening again?
Some things are easier to monitor than others, but with respect to the respectful workplace complaints, those are monitored and tracked. It's easy to count and record. We'll be able to monitor and record the calls to the whistleblower hotline, and we'll also be able to track, incidents that are referred to either external investigation or mediation processes, for example, as a result of items that are brought forward, or also items that may be coming in through that whistleblower hotline that we want to report over to the Municipal Auditor General or over to HRP if it looks like there's some criminality or fraud activity.
Okay, so will that be monitored by the CAO's office or by HR?
That will be through HR. But one of the things I will note that is relevant to helping us address the majority of the recommendations in the hiring practices audit, now that we've got through this big piece of work on the respectful workplace policy work and processes that we needed to address, there's a lot of policy work and process work that is going to come out of this audit that will have human resource and system implications. One of the things I was very surprised to see when I returned to the municipality in January last year is that corporate records management, there is no standardized corporate records management system or policy across the organization. That'll be one of the requirements, I think, that is going to help us be able to address some of these recommendations. The other one is the lack of centralized file management of human resources files. So right now, human resources files are managed within the business unit where the employee is, and some aspects are within human resources, but we need to move to centralized file management. Operational business units are probably going to push back against some of the changes we need to make, that they will perceive that either reduce their autonomy or slow down hiring practices. And there may be operational impacts while we try to make those changes. But for an organization this size, it's a direction we need to go if we want to mature as an organization.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, CAO. Thank you, Councillor Purdy. Go ahead, Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And through you to the CAO, just to follow up on that. So if I look at the follow-up on respectful workplaces, a lot of the issues are the same in terms of the most recent audit on hiring practices, lack of documentation, access, confidentiality. Also, too, lack of anonymity in reporting harassment or other issues. And so the policies that you'll be bringing forward, will they deal with some of these processes, timelines, confidentiality, access, and how many of the outstanding issues from the follow-up will be addressed by what's coming forward in a week and a half or so?
Yes. When we were developing the respectful workplace policy, code of conduct, and the whistleblower policy, and met with the union presidents to review the drafts of those policies, one of the things that really emerged from that meeting is it's business process, not so much it's equally an issue of business process and compliance with business process as it is with having a good policy. So there is a lot of attention being paid to the business process side of it. Working within the human resources and the systems that we currently have.
So would the 10 outstanding, which, forget who it was, I think it might have been Councillor Lovelace said, it's great that management agrees to the recommendations, but management agreed to all the recommendations in the previous report on respectful workplaces, and only 5 have been completed so far. So of the 10 outstanding, do you have a sense of how many of those will be addressed?
We believe they will all be addressed.
Okay.
Yeah. The only issue is what we believe to be the case will not be verified until the next time the Municipal Auditor General does a follow-up audit.
Okay. In 18 months. Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cleary. Go ahead, Councillor Daigle-Gammon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, colleagues, just as a matter of due diligence, I have a question that I would like to ask in camera. So if you would indulge, I would ask that we go in camera.
So are you making a motion that we go in camera?
Yes.
Okay, seconded by Councillor Cleary. All in favor of going in camera? And Councillor Daigle-Gammon, who would you like in the room for that? Who would you like in the room for that? HR, CAO, Auditor General?
The CO and HR and the Auditor General.
Okay, thank you very much. And we are back. Thank you very much, everybody. I'm sure everybody was waiting for this return. We have no motion coming out of the in-camera session. So thank you very much, Andrew, for your report, and thank you for management for the responses to that. We look forward to the follow-up action from that. The next item on the agenda is 13.2.1, the Council Chamber Hybrid Meeting Technology Funding Request. There is no presentation with this item, although we do have staff on hand who are able to answer questions. Go ahead, Councillor Hensby.
Mr. Chairman, I'll put the motion on the floor that the Audit and Finance Standing Committee recommend to Halifax Regional Council approve the transfer of $155,000 from the capital project accounts CI000021 Public Wi-Fi to capital project CI 240006 Council Chamber Technology Refresh.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Daigle-Gammon. Go ahead, Councillor Hensby.
Glad to see this finally happening, sir, and hopefully we get more participation for everyone to connect with us. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any further names on the list. Are we ready for the question on that motion? We seem to be. All in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Great, that motion passes. Thank you very much. Next, we have nothing from the Grants Committee. We have nothing from members of the Standing Committee. We have no motions. We have the in-camera minutes. Councillor Hensby, are you moving their adoption? Thank you. From February 21st, 2024. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Daigle-Gammon, thank you. All in favor of those minutes, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Great, those pass. There are no added items. Are there any, excuse me, any notices of motion? Not seeing any. The date of the next meeting of the Audit and Finance Standing Committee is April 17th, 2024. Can I have a motion to adjourn, please? Thank you, Deputy Mayor. We stand adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.